Hey guys, welcome to the Stand-Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Daniel Sloss's 2018 special Dark. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. So we'll start off with a little bit of background on Daniel Sloss. This is one of two specials that were released together, although he did have one before and he has also recorded one since. I'm a big fan of his. I've seen all of his specials. I even went to see his latest show live. With regards to his stand-up style, he's somewhat introspective, although that's not a major part of his act. And he does a lot of storytelling, but as the name would suggest, dark humour does make up a majority of the show. But with that background out of the way, let's get into the show itself. At the opening of the show, Daniel jumps straight into it with some jokes about American stereotypes and kind of uses this as a way to introduce the show and talk about the fact that he's in America, and it's a really good way to open the show up. The first major bit of the show is about religion. He tells a great story about telling religious jokes in Indiana. And one thing he does really well in this bit is he sets up a joke. He spends a long time building up to the punchline, but it actually pays off at the end, and there's actually is a really solid joke at the end. And that's something that's really hard to do. I've seen a lot of comedians do it much less successfully, but he definitely gets the payoff at the end of it. This bleeds into some more general religious jokes. They're all really good. He kind of gets the crowd on side, lets them know that he's kind of just being a dick for the sake of it and not actually targeting religion. After this, he goes on to talk about his parents a little bit. And one thing he does very well throughout the show is he's really good at giving details that could be boring within the setup, and that if it was done in a different way, you might lose interest during the setup. But he puts jokes in every little bit of the setup and does a really good job of keeping the audience laughing throughout the setup while still getting across what he's trying to say to set up the next story. And it just means that you never really go too long in the show without a laugh in there. He then goes on to tell a story where he puts some mouthwash on his cock. He breaks off from the main story a few times here, but it's always with a really good joke or a really good side story that it's still relevant to the main story. And he never really goes off for long enough that you've forgotten about the main part of the bit or that you've lost interest in the main part of the bit. And the story itself is really good on its own. At the end of this bit, he talks about not having a punchline and how a lot of comedians might put in a punchline, but he doesn't do it here because it's a true story. He then kind of builds up to what is a fairly poor punchline. It works because of how he's built it up, but it's not as good as the previous sort of build up to a punchline. And it's kind of a little bit of a weird part of the show. In the next bit, he talks about parenting more generally. And within this bit, he makes quite a serious point. He covers it with enough jokes to not really bring down the tone of the show at all. But he does make it very obvious that he is trying to make a point. It doesn't come across as preachy or anything, though. It's still very obviously a comedy show. But he does a good job of kind of being able to make the point and still make the audience laugh. Afterwards, he talks about his sister. Now, this is a bit that you kind of have to watch. I don't really want to ruin it. It's a really good bit. I would definitely recommend you go and watch it, even if it's just this bit that you watch. Just search Daniel Sloss talking about his sister or something like that. It's very serious in places. He kind of makes some good points in there. But it's filled with some really, really good jokes. And even though it is a very serious bit, you kind of see him in his element here. It's really funny. And this, for me, is kind of Daniel Sloss at some of his best work. He kind of bleeds this into talking about his friend's dad dying. And again, there's some serious points, but it's still got the jokes throughout it to where you don't feel like he's taking you out of it being a comedy show or anything like that. Throughout the entire show, he does a really good job of talking about serious points, but keeping the tone of the show up and really keeping it lighthearted. To end the show off, he tells what is a fairly funny story. It's not one of the best stories of the night, but it's a really, really solid joke to end on. It's one of the best jokes of the show to end on. And this is a really good way to end a show. It's a short, relevant story to what he'd just been talking about, but he makes sure the audience goes home with a really great joke at the end. So a few little extra things to mention with the show. In terms of transitions, they're really good. He finds easy and relevant links between bits. The show in general is really well structured. There are no obvious cut-off points between any parts of the show. Everything just flows together very nicely, and as a viewer, it'd be easy to confuse certain bits or mold them together. As for a stage persona, he doesn't seem to have a character fully figured out yet. It doesn't hurt the performance in any way, but the character kind of changes bit to bit. He can be a little bit self-deprecating in parts, but in other parts he's very self-assured. There's a couple of times where he points out how brilliant a joke is. But like I said, this doesn't really hurt the performance in any way. It's just that he doesn't have the character aspect figured out fully yet. With the audience, there's not a massive amount to say here. If anything, they're a little bit quiet throughout the show. There is a part of the show where he talks to the audience and they just don't respond. It doesn't look too bad. It's not necessarily a question that needs answering, but it was a little bit awkward in the moment. Generally, though, the audience just play their role in the show. They do a pretty good job of setting the tone that he's looking for throughout the show, and you don't really notice them when you're watching. Finally, we'll end with some overall thoughts on the show. This is a really, really good special. Daniel Sloss is able to tell some very serious stories without changing the tone of the show too much. He manages to keep it very lighthearted throughout. It's a really well written show. Some of the one-line jokes are able to break up the longer stories quite nicely and able to kind of offset when he's talking about something a bit more serious. The show in general is really well structured, although it is broken up into different bits. The general story arc of the show still fits as one overall larger story. So with the caveat that this is some dark humour in there and that's not for everyone, but if that is your kind of thing, then this show is definitely worth watching. In terms of an overall rating, it's not the perfect show by any means, but I would still put it in that kind of top tier of really great shows that I would recommend a lot of people watch. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Thanks for listening to the Stand Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at Stand Up Review and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day, and we'll see you for the next episode.